video from scriptingisfun.com. I'm Mike Page, and we are continuing in this video our tutorial series on remaking an old school Asteroids game. In this video we're going to be looking at Hyperspace. So that's where during the game you can push a key on the keyboard and your ship will disappear and reappear somewhere else randomly on the screen. It could be in the middle of an asteroid, it could be in a safe area. That's kind of a gamble that you take. If you're almost ready to crash, you don't have any other options, then maybe it's worth it. So we'll take a look at how to do that. So first thing we're going to have to do is set up a key that when we press it will cause us to launch the whole series of events. So let's go into Unity's Input Manager. So we're going to go to Edit, we're going to go to Project Settings, Input, and let's find a key. So right now we're using the horizontal left and right arrows, we're using the vertical up arrow, we're using the Fire 1 as our firing bullets hooked to our space bar. Let's take Fire 2 here and we can rename these. Let's call this Hyperspace. Let's pick a button for Hyperspace. Let's just give it the H button for now. H for Hyperspace. It might not be the best position button for this, so we might want to consider a different button for Hyperspace, but for now we'll just call it H for Hyperspace, and then we can pick a different one later if we want to. That's one of the benefits of using the input system here, is that we can go in and change this later without changing anything in our script. So we'll set this up right now for H. We don't need an alternate button. We'll just delete that out, and everything else should be fine just the way it is. We've got a button here called Hyperspace that is hooked to the H button. So back in our player script, our spaceship controller script here, we're going to need to do a check for this input. So in our update function here, this is where we're checking for our vertical and horizontal key presses. We're checking here for our firing bullets. Let's go ahead and just check right here in the same area. So let's check for Hyperspace. So just like we've done before, we're going to go to the input system. We're going to look for a button. So we're going to say GetButtonDown. So that way this will only fire off one time the first frame we push this button. The button that we're going to look for is one we just set up, our Hyperspace, and we just got to spell that the exact same way that we spelled it in our input manager. And if we get that Hyperspace button pressed, if that is true because it was just pressed, then we're going to launch off the whole Hyperspace thing here. Alright, so Hyperspace has a few parts to it. First thing we're going to want to do is make our player disappear, and we're going to want to kind of do what we're doing when he gets hit by an asteroid and then needs to respawn. We're going to go ahead and turn off his collider and his sprite renderer, and then we will move him to a new random position, and then we will turn all that back on. So that's several steps. So let's call a different function here. Let's not put this on the update function. Let's just call a function. So we'll call a function here called Hyperspace. Alright, so we'll call that as soon as the key is pressed. We'll go down here outside of our update function somewhere and make that. So let's go ahead and put it maybe right under invulnerable. We can put it anywhere in here really, just somewhere where it makes sense for you to put it. So this is Hyperspace. Ooh, I got Hyperspace. Let's change, I missed the H there. Hyperspace. So here's our function for Hyperspace. So the first thing we want to do is turn off colliders and SpriteRenderers. Alright, so we're going to turn off colliders and SpriteRenderer, and that's going to be the same way we kind of did down here. So let's take a look and see where we did that before. and that was in the respawn function here. Remember the respawn function? We went and got that sprite renderer, and we turned it off and back on again. So let's see, where do we start all that? Right here, we disabled them right here when we called respawn. Now maybe we should make a slight change here, because we're getting components, the sprite render collider, we're wanting it in a couple of different spots. So instead of taking up computer processing time to go out and continually get these, it would probably be better just to get them one time at the beginning of the game and then just have them stored in a variable. I think that would be a little faster and more performant. So let's make a change here. Up here at the top of our spaceship controls here, let's go ahead and get, let's see, here's where we're getting the rigid body. Let's go ahead and also just add in a public sprite renderer. And we'll just call this sprite renderer. And let's get a public collider 2D. And let's call this collider. Whoops. All right. And then we'll go ahead and link those out in the inspector, and then whenever we want the sprite render or the collider of our spaceship, we'll have it under these variable names here. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back out into Unity here, and I don't think I left anything hanging that would give me an error. No. Let's go to the spaceship, and here we go. We got the sprite render and the collider. So we can just drag the spaceship back into itself here, and it'll grab the sprite renderer from the spaceship, and I can just drag the spaceship back into the collider here as well, and it will get the collider from the spaceship. Now let's see, there's only one collider on our spaceship, this capsule collider, so this works just fine. If you have multiple colliders, then you're probably going to have to do this a little bit differently, because the way this is set up, we're just going to get one collider. Of course, if you have multiple colliders, you could just drag the actual collider out of the list here. So whichever one you want to be the one that's doing collisions with the asteroids. But if you have one collider like I do, this will work just fine. So now we've got these linked in to our script. So the spaceship knows it's got a link here to its sprite render and its collider. Back in our script here now, we can make use of that information. So let's go kind of change what we've already done here in the past. So where we're having a collision here and we're get componenting the sprite renderer, what we can do here now is we can replace this with our sprite renderer variable here. Let's see if we can get it. There we go. And we can just go right, we don't have to do this whole get component. Same thing here for this collider. We can just say collider dot enabled is false. Okay, and then we call the respawn with that. Respawn, see, we're getting the sprite render here again, and we don't need to do that anymore, so I can delete that out. And here I can just say sprite renderer dot enabled is true, and here we can say sprite renderer dot color is that color thing. Okay, and then we call them vulnerable, and vulnerable is where we're getting the collider 2D, so we can replace this with our collider variable, that is true. And see, here we're getting the sprite render again, so again we can just replace all this with sprite renderer, the variable that we made. So this will cut back on all those get component commands that we were doing, since we need to do this several spots. Okay, so then for Hyperspace, we're going to do the same thing that we kind of did here for respawn. And we're going to go ahead and turn off both of those colliders. Let's see, did I get them down here? I did. So let's go ahead and copy these two lines. and go ahead and paste them in right here, because that'll just turn off my sprite render and my collider, so the ship will disappear, and then we will just turn them back on. So maybe what would be better to do is to call Hyperspace with an invoke, and we'll have the Hyperspace part handle the part where it turns it back on. So let's do this. Let's actually turn off the colliders. So let's cut this. Let's go up here where we had the key press detection, and let's go ahead and just paste this in. So first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and turn off those colliders in the sprite render, and then we'll call Hyperspace, but let's do it with an invoke command. So we'll invoke Hyperspace, and let's say maybe it's 1 second that will wait for us to pop back in, so it'll be a pretty quick thing. We could make that a variable, Hyperspace time or something like that. We could play with that later. Let's go ahead and invoke it. Then when Hyperspace is called, what we'll do here is we'll turn on. So let's paste back in those two lines actually, and let's just say turn on colliders and sprite render, and we will make this true, and we will make this true. So that'll turn everything back on. Now, before we do this though, we're going to want to move the spaceship to a new random position. Move to a new random position, and then we'll go ahead and turn those colliders and sprite renderers back on. So we need to generate a new position. So let's make a vector2, and we'll call this new position. We'll set it equal to a new vector2, and we're going to want to generate a random X and a random Y position for our player that is somewhere on the screen. So let's use our friend Random.Range, and for the X here we're going to have to go out and get some numbers. Okay, so let's go out to the screen here, let's go to our spaceship, and let's just see where we want those numbers to be. So I don't want to do it off the screen, and I want to maybe bring him in just a little bit from the edge so we get a chance to see him. So how about we look at right around a 12. So -12 to a +12 on the X. Now on the Y, let's look at, let's do a 9, between a 9 and a 9. So 12s and 9s is what we're going to do here. So let's do this one between a -12 float and a +12 float. And then we'll put in the Y. It's going to be the same type of an idea, Random.Range. So it's going to be between a -9 float and a +9. So that will generate for us a coordinate on the XY plane that is inside of our camera view. And then all we have to do is move to that new position. So we can say transform dot position equals new position, and that will cause us to move right to that spot. Now we also have to decide when we move to the new spot, are we going to kill our velocity so that we're sitting still? Are we going to keep our velocity? Which would be fine either way, because as soon as we put him back here, we're turning him back on, so we'll see him moving. For now, I guess we'll leave our velocity. It's something we could change later. The other thing we want to probably check here is to make sure that we can't hyperspace when we're already hyperspacing, or we could even put a cooldown on our hyperspace so we can't use it that often. So for now though, let's just make sure that we can't hyperspace when we're already hyperspacing. So up here in the update function, we're just doing a check for a button. I could click this button every frame and fire off more hyperspaces, which could pile up a lot of these invokes. So we really don't want to do that. So what we're going to want to do here is have another variable that keeps track of if we're currently hyperspacing or not. So we're going to use a Boolean variable. Let's go ahead and just add this up here somewhere to our list of variables. So, and this can even just be a private variable. We don't need to see this in the inspector. It's going to be a bool. We'll call this hyperspace. Don't think I use that for hyperspace. Hyperspace. I don't think I use that anywhere else for a variable. And what we're going to do here then is, if this is true, then we currently are hyperspacing. So sometimes it's good to put notes on this. True equals currently hyperspacing. Okay, that's good to kind of keep our brains kind of wrapped around that. So we'll make sure at the beginning of the game here that hyperspace equals false, so that we can hyperspace right away if we want to. Then when we push the hyperspace button, let's go ahead and set hyperspace to true. So we'll set that equal to true because we are now in the process of doing a hyperspace. And then after we invoke this, so down here in the hyperspace function, once we're done and we've all popped back up into existence again, we'll say hyperspace equals false, because we are now no longer hyperspacing. We're indeed done with our hyperspace. Okay, so that will kind of keep people from being able to just continually be spamming that hyperspace button. We have to add this in one more place here now. So we're turning it true and false whenever we're using the value for it to control this. So now up here in the update function, we're going to check for the button, but we're also going to check to see if we are currently hyperspacing. So right here we're going to add an AND. So this makes this a compound conditional statement. And we're checking for two conditions. So if it passes the first condition, it'll check the second. So if we get the button, then we'll also check to see if hyperspace is equal to false. So you can write it like this. You can write it out, hyperspace equal to false, or there's a shortcut where all you do is you say not false. So you put an exclamation point in front of a Boolean. So we can write it with the exclamation point here because basically this would have to evaluate to true. The button was pushed, and this variable hyperspace would have to be true normally for this to run. Well, we don't want this to run if the value is true. We want it only to run if hyperspace's value is false. So if I say not hyperspace, well, not true is false. So if it's true, not true is false, so this will fail. This will become a false. If it's false, well, not false is true. So this will be true, this will be true. It'll launch off our whole crazy hyperspace thing. So hopefully that makes sense, and you get used to looking at that shortcut kind of way of typing, because most people use that as they get a little more comfortable with scripting. Alright, so now we have it set where before we can hyperspace, we have to make sure we're not currently hyperspacing. We then set that to true, so it can't happen again now until after we've actually resolved our current hyperspace, where we turn it back to false. Alright, let's save this and let's actually test it out here. I think everything's in place. So we're going to clear out our console. We'll hit play here. And let's get moving here a little bit. And if I push the H key, you see I disappear and I popped up over there. My speed and everything kind of stayed the same. Let's get going this way, hit hyperspace, and I popped up there. Hit it again, popped up right there. So it's a bit of a gamble, but if you're about to die, maybe it's not a bad thing. So every time I push it, I'm popping up somewhere else. We may want to put a limit on how often this can be done. But at least right now it's working just fine. Like I said, we could put a cooldown on this so that you have to wait, you know, a certain number of seconds before it happens again. But I think it's fine for now. So there's our hyperspace. Might be cool to put some sound effects and some... Oh, see there, I ended up hyperspacing right into a rock and killing myself. So we could put some sound effects on the hyperspace. We could put some animation on here so it looks like we kind of zoom in and zoom out, or some particles or whatever. But for now, we just got the functionality in. Hopefully you found this fun. In the next video, we will start looking at the little alien spaceships that sometimes fly across the screen and try to shoot at the player. So we'll start taking a look at how to set that up, get those little alien spaceships to have a basic idea where the player is, and then maybe fire a few bullets in that direction as they move around the screen, and that'll be a fun little thing to add in as well. So as always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave them below in the comments and I'll be happy to look at those. Have a great day and thanks for watching.